Karl, what would you do if you had 8 arms?
In general, there are very few sea creatures that could pose a threat to us humans on land. Even the mighty great white shark would just sit there, gasping for breath, its last sight being a set of human testicles being slowly lowered onto its face. Then you have octopuses, sea creatures that can not only survive on land, but thrive on it under the right conditions.
Didn't you want to tell me a story about an octopus that got onto a ship?
Yes, I did. So let's just set the scene of how smart and wily and stealthy octopuses are with a story that people are going to think isn't true, but I can assure you absolutely 100% is. A couple of years ago there was a story about an English fishing ship that dredged up an octopus, and one of the fishermen grabbed it and chucked it onto deck to deal with later while they sorted out their catch. And then they turned around, octopus is gone. For the next couple of hours, those fishermen spent ages where is this octopus? Where did it go? It didn't go overboard. Where did it go? They saw water going downstairs. It's like a horror movie, right? And they're like, where the hell is this goddamn octopus? And they spent a couple of hours searching for it. Eventually went, all right, let's get a cup of tea, let's regroup, and then we'll look for the octopus later. They go to the teapot and they open it up, and there's an octopus inside. When they told this story to experts, they said, yeah, that makes sense. It found somewhere cold and dark to hide, until it could come out later when it heard less noise. And if those sailors had not been English and required a cup of tea to keep living, that octopus could have been in there for days waiting for its chance.
Imagine if they tried to pour tea. What would that taste like?
No, they pour out the octopus.
It just comes out of the spout, tentacle at a time.
They probably could, to be fair. They can fit through a hole the size of a 10p piece for British people and a quarter for you Americans. And then I don't know what other coins that are roughly that size. So just say 1.5 inches wide diameter space is the size most octopuses can get through. I think it's anything the size of their own beak, which is the only part of their body that's not malleable.
Even if you happen to be a very large octopus, you could pass through a passageway no larger than a quarter.
Like most sea creatures, octopuses will eventually die if left on dry land for too long. However, unlike most sea creatures, instead of completely flipping their shit the second they're pulled out of the water and thrown onto dry land, octopuses will instead remain perfectly calm and in fact observe their surroundings. For example, consider this video of an octopus being nonchalantly hurled onto the deck of a boat, and instead of panicking because it hasn't got any water around it, instead changes fucking colour.
That's amazing. That's actually amazing.
It is, but the thing that I find scary is what would happen if that guy throwing the octopus would have thrown it at someone's face? Well, the octopus would have just assumed his identity, and you look at it and go, man, Steve's not looking all right, but the octopus is gone now, so let's go downstairs. That's how the thing starts, isn't it? The octopus, they can change their body shape to virtually anything they like, and they can change colour. Could they assume the identity of a human if you threw them at their face? All 8 tentacles wrapped around your face? That's the setup, that's alien-esque, isn't it? The face hugger gripping onto your face and oh my god, what's going on? If you'd like to take a brief moment to collect yourself and perhaps stop screaming, feel free to do that. For everyone else, we're going to discuss a few more octopus facts that may convince you, like I've done, to throw a note of surrender and perhaps a tasty treat into the ocean, just to let the octopuses know you're on their side.
So what other examples do you have of how scary an octopus can be?
Well, potentially the scariest thing about them is their intelligence. And I'm not talking other intelligent animals where it's just slap a button and get a treat. Experts who've studied octopus said they have the intelligence of a small child, if not greater. And that's really, really scary. And I think that's scientifically as smart as an animal can be before it has to start paying taxes, or at the very least get a job.
Here, please hit me as hard as you can. Don't hold back.
So how do we know how intelligent an octopus is?
Well, the best example of this is usually the fact they can just escape their tanks seemingly at will, even if said tank was specially constructed to house an octopus, because they're so well known for escaping their enclosures that if you own an octopus or you're an aquarium that has octopuses, they say you get specially made tanks, and octopuses still escape, usually by observing how they're open and closed and then waiting for people to leave the room and then doing that thing again. Do you know the reason octopuses sometimes just escape their tanks? To break into other tanks to eat the fish inside of them and then climb back into their own tank and pretend nothing had gone wrong. So there are actual cases like aquariums going, where are all the fish in this tank? And there's an octopus just there going, dog in The Simpsons, it's like the really suspicious dog squint. And I watch footage back later and see the octopus just climb into a tank, eat all the fish, and then climb back into its own tank. There's also been examples of octopuses climbing into other tanks just to steal toys that they want. Jokes octopuses, they get really bored, and it's one of the things where you have to put toys in an octopus's tank to keep them entertained, to stop them from trying to escape and find other things to do. And they will climb out of their tank, go find, take things off the desk in front of them or from other tanks to keep themselves entertained. And the one that really cracks me up is that sometimes they just climb out of their tanks to wander around like a drunk toddler with adhesive snakes for arms, just knocking shit over. And I like the idea that sometimes people walk into aquariums and stuff and there's just shit all over the floor and the octopus is just there like that. You can't stop me.
It wasn't me.
It wasn't me, it was fucking sucker pad things everywhere and the octopus just in its tank looking all nonchalant, pretending to read a book with a big fake moustache on. It wasn't me, I swear. The shaggy octopus. Please put can you do that now? Do you know it wasn't me? Just please just put a clip in that, it's just a big octopus head on Shaggy as he's doing it.
But she got me on the counter. Wasn't me. Stomach kissing on the sofa. Wasn't me.
The octopus obviously pretends that it didn't do this and tries to hide, but because octopus is the only creature in aquarium smart enough to do this and has the ability to do so, all the experts and the people looking after it, they know it was the octopus, but the octopus is there nah, not me. Definitely wasn't me. Even in the hands of private collectors who know how intelligent octopuses are and go to extreme lengths to keep them inside their tanks, they still escape. For example, there's a tale that tells of one expert waking up at 3 a.m. to find his octopus climbing down his stairs. In another case, a private collector was devastated to walk outside to get his morning paper and find his octopus on the lawn being eaten by ants.
What was it doing on the lawn?
Oh, I should probably point out that private collector lived next to the sea. So the octopus was trying to escape and go all the way down and get to the sea, which is a few hundred feet away, and it only died because it miscalculated how hot the weather was outside, which means that octopus probably would have escaped if that guy would have watched the weather report the previous day. But if it escaped an hour or so earlier, or it had been a wet day, that octopus would have made it to the ocean and told its octopus brothers what's going on. No, you've got to keep these things in tanks now, because if they get back to the ocean, they'll know. They'll know our secrets. They'll say, if you get caught by a fisherman and he throws you onto the deck, don't turn invisible, hide in their teapot. When they open the teapot, you attack. Yeah, they know British people love tea. They know that our tanks can't hold them. They know our weakness in the form of oh yeah, look at this cute octopus.
Squish his head and assume his identity.
Yeah, they could. They're pretty strong. They can crush lobsters and stuff. That's those tentacles are surprisingly strong. That's why scuba divers say just do not go near an octopus. Because there are confirmed cases of octopuses attaching themselves to people's scuba masks and pulling them off.
They know.
Yeah, they know we need oxygen. They know we can't survive down there, but they can survive on land. Oh man.
They've already got the advantage. They can fight on two fronts.
No, we can't. But yeah, they're do not touch them, because if they grab your arm or something like that, they will rip out your oxygen tank, because they just want to play with it and see what it is. Just don't go near them.
That's even more terrifying. They just want to play with it.
Yeah, they'll kill us and they'll watch us drown underwater just because they think it's funny.
Look at their tentacles flailing around.
And it's oh yeah. It's if you had more tentacles, you could probably escape this. So, thanks. They're also masters of disguise as well. Because have you seen what happened? The octopus that disguises itself as a fucking coconut.
No.
Because in South Asia or something like that, there's coconuts fall into the sea and float around. Octopus sometimes just disguise themselves as coconuts and just float like that and change colour, and it's oh, there's a coconut there. It's no, octopus.
So Karl, tea isn't safe. Coconuts aren't safe.
It's awful.
What can we eat? Can we have pizza?
I don't know, because an octopus could go pretty flat. It could go pretty flat, couldn't it? And then you think, oh wow, 8 slices on this pizza. Pick one up, no, tentacle. That's it, game over. Perhaps, though, the scariest thing about octopuses is that they're seemingly capable of holding grudges and targeting single people for their wrath.
I'm assuming there's an example of this.
Yes, there is. There is the case of an octopus called Truman, which was observed spraying a female college student with water, and only that female college student with water, every single time she tried to walk past its tank. No other person, like studying Truman or working in like the place that Truman was housed, ever observed this behaviour. It was just that one single girl, every time she walked past, would get sprayed by water, and it eventually got to the point where she just quit. She was so fucking pissed off with this happening every single time. It's like, I can't study this goddamn octopus. It hates me for some reason, and I don't know why. And like theories range from like maybe she did something to annoy it, to the fact that maybe her reaction amused the octopus. So the idea of this like college girl like screaming when she got sprayed by water was like amusing to the octopus. So she eventually just quit working there, presumably before just writing "fuck you" backwards on Truman's tank.
You know what I think it was?
What?
So they thought they were studying the octopus.
The octopus is studying them. Oh, for the octopus recon squads. It's all about... There could be 5 octopuses in this room right now, we won't know. They could be all over this room right now. Would you really know? Would you know if I was an octopus, Brad? You say, oh, Karl, you're looking a bit like squidgy today. So, yeah, I've not been to the gym in a while. It's like, oh, no, it turns out octopus. Just there. Karl, have you had a haircut? Yes. Yes, I have octopus. So yes, if you ever find yourself waking up in a cold sweat a couple of weeks from now, in the middle of the night, and you think, oh no, I guess I'm just like not sleeping very well. It could very well be that there is an octopus in your room scoping it out for those octopus recon squads, and that you are moments away from being slapped 8 times across the face.
So quite a while back, we had a big discussion about how birds would take over the world.
We did, didn't we, after we found out how smart crows are?
What is your take on how fish would take over the world?
See, fish, like, that's too, like, I know it's quite broad already, but that's not broad enough, because obviously fish near exclusively live in water, say for a few, they can survive for a couple of minutes. I think if we expand it to, like, all denizens of the ocean, and put, like, you know, the octopuses as, like, the supreme leaders and the recon force, I think the fish and like this other sea creatures, like the birds, could stand quite a good chance. 'Cause obviously, they would have, like, already they've got the biggest navy, so we've got that sorted.
Yeah, Britain can go fuck off.
Yeah, like they've got like the whales, they've got the submarines, like and stuff like that. But they've even got like some air force, like marginally, because they've got flying fish. And like as well, if we're on a boat, you're pretty much fucked. So it doesn't matter what body of water you're on. I'm pretty sure there's a YouTube video out there of some guy trying to fish, just getting slapped by something or other. Like, Joe, you see those videos like people fishing on boats, like a bass just flies up and hits me in the face. That would be all humans everywhere, anytime they went near any body of water. Just hundreds of fish just fly out and slap you in the face.
So within days, they've conquered the ocean.
Yeah.
The land is where the difficulty is going to be.
But, like, if they've got all the denizens in the ocean, they've got crabs. I think, like, Joe, those Christmas Island crabs that they go everywhere, they can make it on land. They've got all the frogs. Joe, those frogs that dig water in Africa and stuff like that. They could, like, slowly erode away the land mass, couldn't they? Do you know, it's like those like frogs that dig and like, what is it, killer whales can beach themselves and they can dig themselves in sand. I think if they all worked in unison, you know, under the command of the octopuses, they could very easily just slowly encroach on land that way. And also, not to mention the stuff like saltwater crocodiles and stuff like that can live in both salt and fresh water, because that would be the main issue, wouldn't it? Like how the freshwater animal, like sea creatures, or freshwater like water-based creatures, like, you know, communicate with the sea-based ones in the saltwater. That's why you've got like crocodiles and stuff as you go between.
Crocodiles are demoted to messenger boys.
Yeah, because they're the only ones that can survive both, so they can pass the messages between. All those like weird like pink dolphins that can swim in rivers and the sea to a degree, or like creatures that live in estuaries near rivers. That's where they come in, so they can pass. So what they could do is like, or they could send messages from the ocean from the octopuses to the river-based ones, so like the dumber fish. So like, all the rivers then become we can't do it. So they could like go into our dams. Can you imagine how hard it would be for us to get hydroelectric power if 4,000 fish per second were just flying themselves, like just salmon and stuff, and they throw themselves up waterfalls? Imagine if they were doing that just up hydroelectric dams. And then like, oh yeah, let's say, you know, all of our water plants and stuff like that, if just fish are just throwing themselves into them under the command of the octopuses.
I like this mental image of the land being eroded from the outside, like someone eating an apple, and it just
it's
gradually
like very
gets thinner
slowly,
and thinner.
just digging away. Like if you've got every sea creature on Earth, they slow, like if they started somewhere small like Ireland, So that'll be the test. Let's just erode Ireland into the ocean. And very slowly we're like, and the thing is though, once you've started doing that, it's like, the only way to get really is like air. But like, oh yeah, that's fair enough. But you can't escape by boat, so the ferry's gone. And is there enough planes in Ireland to get all the Irish people out before the fish start encroaching in? It's terrifying, man. They could do it. I don't think they can do it as good as the birds, but I think at this point the birds would help, just be dicks. No, I know what they could do. Do you know that video that went viral a couple of years ago of that whale slapping the seal with its tail and it goes like 400 foot in the air? The whales could start doing that to get planes out of the sky.
Sending sharks up and then...
Yeah, if they did, imagine if they did that'd be Sharknado. This seal goes so high. Imagine if they did that, but they were like aiming it and they were doing it in tandem. So you had like 40 whales throwing 40 sharks like 300 foot into the air to take planes out and stuff like that. Game over. What do you do at that point? Like, even like, so you can say, oh, we can go higher than the sharks, like the whales can throw the sharks. That's fair enough, yes. There's only so long you can go in the sky before you got to land again.
But also, if they keep eroding the land, then the water level's going to rise. So they can get higher and higher on their own.
Oh man, it's terrifying, isn't
They've
it?
planned it out.
They have.
If we can raise the water level by 5 feet, we can get that extra bit of a distance
Like
on the
Holland's
floor.
gone. Holland has fallen to the whales. It's like, no!
It's just the last few humans hiding in like the centre of the land
Like
masses.
Miami as well. I think Miami would be completely underwater if they managed to, they could row that way. So they could take out Miami and Holland. Damn it.
Those two very specific locations.
Just imagine turning on the news that, just Holland is gone. Just an octopus on the news, sending out 8 different Morse code messages at once in every language it knows, just telling us all to fuck off.
He's wrapping himself around like the leader of Holland's face. Just, Holland has
And
fallen!
he's got that and a fish bowl over his head to keep that, so he looks like Mysterio, and he makes him wear a big cape. I like these conversations. These are fun.